Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jared Duval, Executive Director of Energy Action Network. Today, we are very proud and excited to host presentations by EAN's two summer interns, Josh Valentine and Evelyn Hatem, on their research projects about heat pump adoption and the social costs of greenhouse gases, respectively. First, a word about logistics for today's webinar. After both presentations are complete, we will have time for Q&A. If you have a question for either Josh or Evelyn, please enter it in the Q&A box that you can see at the bottom of the Zoom screen after they've both finished presenting. And then I'll moderate the Q&A by selecting questions from those that are open in the Q&A box. I also want to note that today's presentation and discussion is being recorded and will be available on the EAN website afterward, alongside Josh and Evelyn's reports. Before we proceed, I just want to say a little bit more about EAN's summer internship program. This is now the fourth consecutive year that EAN has hosted two summer interns under the management and mentorship of EAN Senior Fellow Christine Donovan. Some of you may remember Christine wisely came up with the idea for this program and then generously stepped forward to design and manage it in the spring of 2020 after the pandemic began. Christine recognized an opportunity both to benefit our network in the state of Vermont by having talented students conduct research on important energy and climate related issues, and an opportunity for EAN to invest in the development of the next generation of energy leaders in Vermont and beyond. I want to thank Christine for her great work again this year and each of the past 3 years. Our network, our state, and all 8 of EAN's summer interns, past and present, are better off because of her vision and dedication. EAN's summer internship program is also made possible thanks to the generous support of EAN staff, network members, and public sector partners, many of whom are with us today and many of whom took time to speak and work with our interns during the course of their research this summer. Thank you. Thank you also to Renstrom Perkowitz Social Investments for providing the grant funding that makes it possible for EAN to fairly compensate our summer interns, because we believe that paid internships are more appropriate and far more equitable than unpaid internships. Of course, I also want to thank Josh and Evelyn for their incredible work this summer. You all are in for a great set of presentations. This is not a normal summer internship by any stretch of the imagination. Much more is expected of EAN summer interns than in many other summer internship programs. In just 10 weeks, EAN's interns conduct sophisticated energy research and analysis and produce high quality papers and presentations on their chosen topics. Quite an impressive feat for 2 college juniors. Evelyn and Josh have delivered in an impressive way, keeping to the high standards of previous intern cohorts. And so we're really proud of them and celebrate them and their work. It's a testament to their skills and hard work and to the support that Christine provides. With that, I want to now turn it over to Christine Donovan, manager of EAN's summer internship program.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you all for joining us. I just will say very briefly, it is an absolute delight to work with 2 bright, motivated future climate action and clean energy leaders each summer. And I strongly recommend that you consider it for your own agency, organization, or business moving forward. And with that, I want to thank EAN for their philanthropic support that they created to support the interns during the summer. And it's a pleasure volunteering and working with them each year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who will introduce himself and take you through the results of his very interesting and innovative project.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Christine. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and taking the time to be here. Before we get started, I want to thank Christine and the EAN team, Jared, Cara, and Lena, for their guidance through this project. It's been an absolute pleasure working alongside such brilliant minds in the space. Today, I'll be speaking with you about the research I did on the heat pump market in Vermont and the various opportunities and challenges that are possibly limiting the market and the technology from achieving its true potential. Next slide. So a little bit about me. I was born in Arkansas and lived there until I was about 7, until my family made their way up to the Granite State, known by many as New Hampshire. It was both the first time I had ever seen snow and the first opportunity I had to put on a pair of skis. And then some odd years later, I became a ski racer, and I'm now going into my senior year at Middlebury College, finishing up my career as a Division I cross-country ski racer. Funny how life plays out sometimes. Anyhow, my family now lives in New Brunswick, Canada, so I've hit almost every climate in North America. Outside of ski racing, I enjoy backcountry skiing, hiking, and biking. At Middlebury, I am currently studying environmental economics and anthropology. Next slide. The purpose of my project had 3 main focuses. The first, to research and document the current market for heat pumps in Vermont. The second, to identify key opportunities and challenges affecting the ability to rapidly scale up the heat pump use in order to meet legally binding greenhouse gas reduction targets. And last but not least, the third, to suggest future strategies and actions for addressing key challenges. Next slide. The research began with gaining a deeper understanding of what and who composes the heat pump market in Vermont. This consisted of mapping out the policy framework and key market players into an ecosystem map to understand how the private and public sectors interact in the heat pump market. Once I had gained a conceptual understanding of the ecosystem, I identified key questions to focus on to better understand market activity and consumer acceptance and adoption in Vermont. Next slide. My review of the relevant policy framework began with diving into the Global Warming Solutions Act and the 2021 Climate Action Plan to understand the state's current commitments and how we plan to achieve them. I then reviewed Vermont's existing and developing relevant thermal policies and programs, such as the Renewable Energy Standard. The thermal sector makes up almost 40% of state emissions, making it a key sector to focus on for improving energy efficiency and emissions reductions. Heat pumps proved to be one potential solution. Next slide. A study conducted by the Public Service Department in 2017 on heat pump adoption forecasted the number of heat pumps needed to help the Global Warming Solutions Act's goals. Vermont has a building stock of around 350,000 buildings. The current model suggests that we'll need an increasing number of installations year after year until 2030, in which installations will begin declining as more and more of the building stock already have them installed. A couple of concerns with installation forecast models I've observed is the assumed consistency in demand until the near full building stock is reached. The second, as the market matures, demand will likely shift towards servicing and replacements, which could impact the accuracy of the numbers. Replacements could accidentally be counted as new installations, meaning a possible overestimation of how much of the building stock has installed them. Next slide. After understanding some of the policy framework and the current state of the heat pump market in Vermont, I implemented a systems thinking research approach consisting of 4 key components that set the stage for successful adoption of technology. The 4 are, as pictured, heat pump technology and utilization, consumer awareness and demand, policy and regulatory framework, and workforce installation and service infrastructure. And as we'll see, they are all very integrated with each other. I'll begin with heat pump technology and utilization. The 4 types of heat pumps most commonly seen are in blue. The ductless mini split is by far the most common of the 4, offering single zone options and multi-zone options. We'll dive into the difference of these 2 a little later on. These are followed by a ducted system offering a central heating and cooling source, which is common among houses with pre-existing ductwork. And lastly, we have geothermal and air-to-water heat pumps, which are the least common at the moment due to their price tag, but some of the most efficient systems. Each system comes with an outdoor and indoor hardware, as pictured. Next slide. So, what's going on with the utilization of this technology once installed? While it's important to get the technology out there and installed in people's homes, it's equally important to get people to use it correctly. If people aren't using it correctly, those heating with fossil fuels are achieving minimal or no greenhouse gas reductions. Interestingly, a recent Burlington Electric Department study indicated that almost 25% of BD heat pump customers are using them for cooling only. However, this may not be a statewide trend as economic incentives vary region by region. Next slide. Heating use represented in column 5 was almost 65% below what was predicted represented in column 2. Cooling use represented in column 7 was almost 5 times more than what was predicted for the summer represented in column 4. While high cooling use is still helping achieve energy efficiency as an alternative to traditional air conditioning units, the true fossil fuel displacement comes from high heating use, and we are not currently seeing that happen in BED customer territory. Next slide. A large reason this could be happening is in BED's customer territory is because their territory is primarily composed of natural gas consumers. As of 2022, natural gas proved to be one of the cheapest heating options in Vermont. This offers a logical economic explanation to why BED customers may not be heating their homes as much with their heat pumps. Slide. So what's working well with heat pump technology and customers' utilization of it? Over the last few years, manufacturers have poured a lot of time and money into research and development of this technology, helping improve the efficiency of heat pumps. They recently invented new refrigerants that are able to absorb more heat at lower temperatures, making them more effective in colder climates as well. Those experiencing well-functioning heat pump systems have likely been formed to implement what is called the set it and forget it method. Traditionally, people have often implemented a setback method with their current form of electric or fossil fuel heating system. This allows them to save on their heating bills by reducing the temperature of their home at night or while they're away at work. This has proved to be an effective measure of cost effectiveness because those heating systems can effectively generate heat fast enough to bring the home to a desired temperature of comfort quickly. Given that a heat pump does not generate heat and instead transfers it, it does not have the same rapid heat generation ability. Instead, a heat pump is best used to maintain a desired temperature 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Both the setback and the set it and forget it method have been tested with an air source heat pump, and the set it and forget it method proved both more cost effective and comfortable day to day. It may seem like an odd adjustment and a waste of energy given that one's home will remain warm during times away, but the truth is the technology is just that good and efficient. The last thing I want to note is while there is a lot to improve on the installation front, we can be proud because there is plenty going right and the technology is doing its job when installed correctly. Next slide. Many consumers who are not reaping the promised benefits of this technology can often be frustrated with their investment or even see it as a malfunctioning or ineffective equipment. While there may be an occasional defective unit sold or a poor installation job, current modeling often sets expectations much too high. It is important that we continue to conduct studies on the performance of the technology and do a better job of relaying realistic expectations. Secondly, it's important that we continue messaging the effectiveness of the set it and forget it method and see through that installers are passing that knowledge on to their customers. Lastly, I want to discuss a rising concern with the types of ductless mini splits. As mentioned before, there are two types, the single zone and the multi-zone. Multi-zone systems are some of the most commonly installed ones because they attempt to provide a centralized heating or cooling element covering more area of the house. These are attractive because they require less outdoor infrastructure than having multiple separate single zone mini splits, keeping the outer aesthetics of the house a little cleaner and requiring less infrastructure, making them a little more affordable. Unfortunately, it is believed that multi-zone systems often don't work properly as the ventilation heads don't properly interact with each other and the centralized thermostat, leading to varied temperatures throughout the house and oftentimes less savings. It is believed that multiple single zone ductless mini splits are much more effective because they only rely on their own thermostat and can effectively heat or cool the zone they are placed in. Further studies need to be done to test this possible issue and effective messaging of the results. Next up, we have consumer awareness and demand. So what's working well? Well, demand is in fact growing. The state is up to an estimated 55,000 installed heat pumps, with 45,000 of those being rebate eligible high efficiency models. This shows that there is a demonstrated market uptake in Vermont. The 2017 Public Service Department study found that consumer awareness was largely driven by friend-to-friend recommendation. It's important to acknowledge the study is now 6 years out of date, so I can't say for certain that friend-to-friend recommendation is still the top driver of consumer awareness in the heat pump market, but there is something to be said for the power of trust and the effectiveness of word-of-mouth recommendation. It's important heat pump consumers have positive and consistent experiences to keep this form of awareness alive. Current marketing efforts by various distribution utilities and energy efficiency utilities have proven effective, and they should continue to advertise through their current channels. Next slide. Despite plenty of successful installations, consumers' experiences with the technology can vary, resulting in market confusion, potentially impeding the rapid scale of heat pumps. There's a famous quote by Benjamin Franklin, which most often applicable in the context of people, but I think it powerfully illustrates people's perspective on and acceptance of anything, including technology. Ben Franklin says, "It takes many good deeds to build a good reputation and only one bad one to lose it." 9 consumers could have properly installed systems and be reaping the comfort and cost effectiveness benefits. But as soon as one consumer invests thousands of dollars into a system that doesn't provide the promised benefits, the technology all of a sudden becomes a risk of an investment, which is then factored into further consumers' decisions. As just mentioned, marketing efforts by various utilities have proven successful. However, to continue scaling market uptake, further efforts by boots on the ground companies, such as the installers, could go a long way as consumers appreciate hearing from those handling the equipment. Next slide, please. Next, we have workforce installation and service infrastructure. So Vermont has a couple workforce development efforts and initiatives underway, including the talent acquisition pipeline, which is in its early stages of development. Its goal is to attract talent to the Vermont's blue-collar workforce. Second is training grants from the IRA that are expected to be distributed in late 2023. The IRA allocated $150 million to distribute between states and independent projects to help train and establish a professional residential energy efficiency workforce. Second, as the market continues to mature, established contractors and staff continue to gain valuable knowledge and experience. When a new hard technology hits the market, there is a period of time where learning how to integrate it into existing systems takes place. This can result in suboptimal installation jobs, as the best practices for installation are learned through experience. The more mature the market gets, the more experience existing workforce members get, gaining valuable experiential knowledge. And lastly, the Energy Co-op of Vermont, VGS, and Vermont Energy's in-house apprenticeship programs have proven to be very effective. They allow an employee to gain the knowledge and skills necessary under one roof by offering training and education, as well as the ability to shadow experienced professionals. So where is there opportunity in the workforce installation and service infrastructure? Well, as demand for heat pumps grow, more HVAC companies are adding heat pumps to their offerings. And although there is an HVAC-related license, Vermont does not require HVAC service professionals to be licensed, only certified by the EPA for the handling and disposal of various refrigerants. In addition, there is no specific national or state level certification to be a heat pump installer, although opportunities are often granted through such companies as Mitsubishi when an employee is working for a company such as Vermont Energy, who has a partnership with one of the manufacturers. Next slide, please. Heat pump sizing, installation, or servicing may be included in various broader HVAC training courses as part of high school or post-secondary school, but it does not appear that there is one standardized curriculum yet. An updated and consistent curriculum in trade schools and licensing programs addressing proper installation, servicing, and usage practices could help address this. In addition, established companies in Vermont already offering in-house training and apprenticeship programs report needing financial support to scale such efforts. Various incentives that help alleviate the financial burden that many employers implementing these apprenticeship programs could go a long way in helping them scale their workforce. Next slide. Lastly, we have the policy and regulatory framework component. So what's working well? Vermont has a really strong policy framework, including aggressive quantitative greenhouse gas reduction targets. These policies, as well as efforts from key market players such as the energy efficiency utilities, Efficiency Vermont and BED, have played a large role in advancing the heat pump market. The most recent success was the passing of the Affordable Heat Act, which is intended to result in a sustained, orderly transition away from fossil fuels currently used for heating in most Vermont buildings. Next slide. Given the strength of Vermont's climate policy framework, I do not have any further suggestions for consideration. It will be important to keep an eye on whether the Public Utilities Commission's Affordable Heat Act program proposal is approved in 2025. Immediate action will be needed to ensure the thermal sector goals are still met if it is not. In the meanwhile, it is important to continue assessing early heat pump market trends, installers' practices, and customer use. Next slide. To wrap things up, The number one concern that needs to be addressed is underutilization. We cannot achieve our greenhouse gas reduction goals if heat pumps are not effectively displacing fossil fuel use. Further evaluation, measurement, and verification analysis will be needed to better understand usage trends outside of the BED customer territory. Second, as the market matures, we need continued rebates and incentive programs by energy efficiency utilities and distribution utilities to help continue getting this technology into homes. It is a large investment, and given that Vermont is still in an early adoption phase, it's important the financial barrier stays low. Third, we need to listen to those with their boots on the ground. This battle can't be fought only by third parties with invested interest. We need to involve and understand what the current blue-collar workforce is experiencing in the field and their needs and challenges. Fourth, we need to use verified heat pump output values so future models and forecasts can set realistic expectations. Next slide, please. Fifth is boots on the ground marketing. It's important for consumers to hear from both the installers and the rebate providers. Sixth is employer and employee incentives. There are well-established companies with effective apprenticeship programs that express their need for financial help in training and licensing employees. Seventh, we need to retain a strong focus on equity. As programs get rolled out, it will be important to keep a close eye on how effective the low to moderate income programs are. And lastly, we need to ensure a consistent user journey and experience. It's essential that users are satisfied and their expectations are met. One more thing I would like to mention in relation to my project is that my family has 3 single-zone ductless mini splits. We have a fully weatherized home in a cold, arid climate with a ductless unit on each floor and use them to heat and cool throughout the entire year. We barely have to rely on our secondary heating source and are able to realize significant cost savings in the winter. Interestingly, as a household who did not previously air condition our home, most of those cost savings are actually lost due to the cooling needs in the summer. I mention this both as a testament to the effectiveness of this technology when installed properly, and also to acknowledge that although my family experiences the ideal scenario, this is not always the case. Thank you, and I'll pass it on to Jared.
Thank you so much, Josh. Great work. And for folks who have questions, if you can just hold those, maybe jot them down in a note, and then after Evelyn's presentation, Evelyn will go next. We'd invite you to put in questions on either or both presentations into that Q&A box, and we will take questions on both presentations after Evelyn presents. But next up is Evelyn. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, and great job, Josh. Thank you everyone for joining us, and special thank you to Christine and to the EAN team for supporting me in this project. Today, I'll be sharing about the latest research on the social costs of greenhouse gases and how this concept can be better incorporated into Vermont's climate policy. First, I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Evelyn Hatem. I'm a rising senior at Dartmouth College, where I study environmental studies and public policy. I grew up in central New Hampshire, and I'm excited to hopefully work on decarbonization strategies after graduation. Outside of the classroom, I love to race triathlons and hike in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The key purpose for my report was to provide an explainer linking updated national research to Vermont's use of the social costs of greenhouse gases. Back in Vermont's 2021 Climate Action Plan, the Vermont Climate Council chose to use social cost of greenhouse gases values that were up to date at the time. Now, here in 2023, there is updated national research to suggest that the true social costs are higher than previously estimated. These new estimates are what I'll be talking about today. In order to meet this goal, I've reviewed articles and reports by academic experts, state government professionals, and energy and environmental consultants. To round out this information, I conducted interviews, which helped me draw connections between national level research and state climate action here in Vermont. Guiding my research were these key questions, which focus on the social costs of greenhouse gases as a concept, before breaking down the concept into component parts and connecting it back to its policy applications in Vermont. To understand the concept of the social costs of greenhouse gases, we can look at how the concept came to be. The main problem was that the costs and benefits of reducing greenhouse gas emissions were not being described in the same units. On the cost side, we'd have the cost of a mitigation strategy, such as the upfront cost of building a public transit system. And on the benefit side, we'd have the avoided emissions from that public transit system, making the comparison indirect. So in order to do a more complete and effective cost-benefit analysis, policymakers needed a dollar amount to quantify the benefits of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This smooths out the comparison between costs and benefits by using those same dollar units. That estimate is described in this language in Vermont's Climate Action Plan. This definition focuses on the social cost of carbon dioxide, though other greenhouse gases have their own social costs due to their global damages potential. For example, the social cost of methane or the social cost of nitrous oxide. I use the term social costs of greenhouse gases as an umbrella term for all of these social costs. Others use the phrase social cost of carbon to refer to the same concept. Finally, while many activities contribute to carbon dioxide emissions, it's helpful to put the scale of 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide into context. A typical passenger vehicle emits about 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide annually, according to the EPA. This concept first came to be used in the United States for environmental policy back in 2008, when President Obama formed an interagency working group across numerous executive branch agencies to study the social cost of carbon. Following their work, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine reviewed the estimates and recommended methodological changes to improve these existing estimates. Shortly after these recommendations were made, President Trump entered office and disbanded the interagency working group, at which point the forefront of this research kind of returned to academia and think tanks, rather than advancing in the federal government at that time. In 2021, when President Biden entered office, he reconvened the interagency working group, and they opted to use interim values for the time being based on those 2016 estimates. Around the similar time frame, New York State hired Resources for the Future, a Washington, D.C. based think tank, to provide estimates for use in New York State policy. These values were eventually adopted into Vermont's 2021 Climate Action Plan. And then in 2022, which is the more updated national research that I'll be focusing on today, a team of researchers from Resources for the Future and University of California, Berkeley, published an article in a leading environmental journal titled "Comprehensive Evidence Implies a Higher Social Cost of Carbon Dioxide." And along a similar time frame, the EPA released its peer review version for a similar report. That peer review period has just recently closed, and now researchers at the EPA are responding to peer review comments. The discussion around the social costs of greenhouse gases centers around calculations of marginal damages, which we see here described on the right. But there are other complementary approaches which similarly provide economic analysis to describe the impacts of climate change. On the left, we see a concept called marginal abatement costs, which are calculated by beginning with a specific emissions target, like that set by the Paris Climate Accord or by the Global Warming Solutions Act, and working backwards 1 metric ton at a time to determine which mitigation measures deliver the most mitigation or abatement per measure. Simply put, this number describes the marginal cost or savings of action. And on the other hand, marginal damages describes the marginal cost of inaction or maintaining the status quo. Marginal damages are most often calculated using complex computer models called integrated assessment models. The models integrate 4 distinct modules to represent human environmental systems at the global scale. From left to right, each module's outputs become the inputs of the following module. For example, when future emissions are predicted by the socioeconomics module all the way on the left, the climate module then converts the emissions into specific climate impacts, such as sea level rise. The damages module assigns a dollar amount to these climate impacts. And then finally, the discounting module modifies that dollar amount to reflect a preference for short-term benefits over long-term benefits. The final outcome of all of these modules together is a dollar amount that describes the social cost of a specific greenhouse gas, such as the social cost of carbon dioxide. Within the integrated assessment models, specific choices and assumptions affect the outcome. One of these important choices is the selection of a discount rate. So the discount rate seeks to answer the question, relative to today, how much does society value future dollars? This choice is a question of economics and moral philosophy. A higher discount rate means that future dollars are worth less relative to today's, a concept separate from inflation. Second, there are uncertain model components. Any model is just that, a model of a highly complex system. To address this, researchers are transparent about specific parameters and their degrees of uncertainty, using statistical tests to determine how certain they are about a specific parameter, input, or outcome. A second important assumption is the choice between damage modules. Like I said, we'll be focusing our discussion on the recent estimates by Resources for the Future and UC Berkeley, as well as the EPA. And these two models are the same in 3 of the 4 modules of the integrated assessment model, but they differ in their approach to describing damages. Again, the damages module is the one that converts climate impacts into a dollar amount. So in their damages function by Resources for the Future, they add together different sectoral impacts, so health, agriculture, energy, and coastal impacts. And the model that does this is called the GIVE model. The EPA also uses the GIVE model in their damage function, but in addition, they use 2 other approaches to calculate the damages, and then they average the outcomes across all 3. And this is part of the explanation for why Resources for the Future and the EPA's estimate differs a little bit. There are also equity considerations when describing the social costs of greenhouse gases. One important thing to be clear about is that these damages are describing global rather than local damages. And experts have raised the question of whether across this global versus local scale, should there be different social costs of greenhouse gases which take into account global equity? Should the US have a different amount used in their policymaking as a low-lying island nation? It's the environmental justice component, where costs and benefits of climate change are distributed differently across the globe. And it could assign a different cost of greenhouse gas emissions to reflect this. For the US, the incorporation of equity weights would likely increase the estimate of the social costs of greenhouse gases. Second, there are important equity considerations around intergenerational equity. So as we discussed with the discount rate is often estimated by looking at humans' behavior in the market. But those observations are describing a concept called the time preference for money, and it's describing an individual person's time preference for money. And some say that this time preference for money cannot be expanded across generations, because they raise the question, why does our generation have the right to place lesser value on costs of future generations, when those future costs will be borne by human beings that do not yet exist, nor have the say in the decision-making process? Amid all of these considerations and various model components and research teams, there are very practical and specific applications for the concept in Vermont's climate policy. Beginning with Vermont's initial climate action plan in 2021, we see that the Vermont Climate Council made 5 key decisions in terms of the social costs of greenhouse gases. First, they opted to use a global damages-based estimation based on the work that Resources for the Future did for New York State. This estimated $121 per metric ton to describe the impacts of a pulse of CO2 emissions in 2020. Second, they opted to use a 2% discount rate with additional analyses to be performed with 1% and 3% discount rates to demonstrate sensitivity to the discount rate. Finally, they noted that updated research was expected in 2022, which is what I've been reading about this summer, and recommended to update the value in alignment with that research. And since the implementation of the Climate Action Plan, we've seen social costs of greenhouse gases used in various kinds of cost effectiveness testing or cost benefit analyses here in Vermont. First, we have this example from the Agency of Natural Resources, where they use the social cost of carbon dioxide to describe the environmental and economic benefits of a proposed rule. They calculated the social cost of carbon dioxide from Advanced Clean Cars 2 over the timeframe 2026 to 2040, as well as a similar comparison over 2025 to 2050. Next, please. The Public Service Department used the social cost of greenhouse gases in a proceeding regulating a purchase of renewable natural gas contract, comparing the estimated emissions reductions relative to fossil gas. Third, Efficiency Vermont uses social costs of greenhouse gases as part of its societal cost effectiveness testing. As one of the groupings of benefits, they have the greenhouse gas avoided externality costs. In that, the social cost of carbon dioxide is combined with electric or fuel greenhouse gas emissions to assign $1 per kilowatt hour or $1 per MMBTU avoided externality cost in their energy efficiency programs. With each of these examples, we can see where the social costs of greenhouse gases are being applied and imagine how updated social costs of greenhouse gases estimates could impact future work. This updated future work from EPA in the first row and from Resources for the Future Berkeley are the updated estimates. So the key overall conclusion from this research is that the social costs of greenhouse gases are estimated to be higher than in the 2021 Climate Action Plan. This specific table compares values of the social cost of carbon dioxide between Resources for the Future and the EPA, though other data exist for the social costs of methane and nitrous oxide, all of which are available online in Resources for the Future and EPA materials, as well as in my written report. The leading recommendations at this point are in the 2% discount rate column that's been chosen as the preferred discount rate by these researchers. And we have the published $185 per metric ton from Resources for the Future in Berkeley. And then we have the $193, which is unrounded, or $190 rounded in the peer review published report from the EPA. The conclusions for Vermont going forward are that there's updated national research, both by the EPA and Resources for the Future, that there is a higher social cost of carbon dioxide value than previously estimated, placing estimates between $185 to $190 per metric ton of carbon dioxide. Second, I want to highlight the language where the Vermont Climate Council committed to revising the social costs of greenhouse gases as new research and analysis becomes available. The development phase of the upcoming 2025 Vermont Climate Action Plan could be a key time to incorporate this updated national research. Third, it's helpful to contextualize these updated estimates with the fact that they're likely to underestimate the true social costs of greenhouse gases, since that key damages module does not yet incorporate impacts on morbidity and biodiversity and loss of ecosystem services, among others. Researchers continue to update and add to the available models. All of the code for the GIVE model, which is the leading integrated assessment model, it's open source and publicly available with the intention that researchers across the country can add to it. As work continues on this important topic, we can expect further updates. So I strongly recommend staying tuned to the work by Resources for the Future and to the publication of the final report estimate by the EPA. Thank you so much for listening. I'm always happy to chat more about this topic and learn what I can about these tools available to us in mitigating climate change. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Great job, great work, both of you. Thank you so much for sharing this research and these presentations with us. At this point, I see someone has already started us off in the Q&A box. We will be taking questions for either Josh or Evelyn. So let me open that up. From Adam Jacobs at the Public Service Department. Evelyn, great presentation, Adam says, and he asks if you could speak to what, if anything, you learned about the use of the social cost of carbon or social cost of greenhouse gases in other jurisdictions beyond Vermont.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not go very deep into this question specifically, but there's helpful materials from the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is an alliance of governors working on climate change, and they have a really helpful publication that was before these most recent estimates, but they conducted a study on where the social cost of greenhouse gases was being used throughout the country. So I'd be happy to look at that for specific examples. But I was focusing just on Vermont here.
Thanks, Evelyn. A question for you now, Josh, from Diana Chase. When you talked about the setback method versus the set it and forget it method, question if you meant to say that it is better and uses less energy to set the thermostat at one temperature and leave it there 24 hours a day than it is to turn it down when you're going out for the day and then turn it up when you get home, and wondering that seems like it's not possible. Can you speak more about the differences between the setback method and the set it and forget it method?
Yeah, definitely. I totally understand where you're coming from. It kind of puzzled me at first when I'd learned this as well. So it's a great question. It's a little counterintuitive because like you're actively leaving your heat pump running all day long, but given at how efficient it is at transferring heat, it's able to maintain a temperature using less energy overall than if you were to set it back and then expect it to come back up to that desired temperature in a rapid amount of time. And oftentimes when doing so, it kicks in your secondary heating source. So then you're not using your heat pump effectively for heating, and you're burning like possibly fossil fuels. Or if you have an electric backup, then you end up burning more energy using your other electric source. So I hope that answers your question. It's I don't know the technicalities behind it, but that's just kind of what has been found to be the best method of use for both cost savings and energy efficiency.
Thanks, Josh. So first a comment and then a question, both from two of our colleagues at the Regulatory Assistance Project. First from Rich Cowart, just wanted to say 2 excellent presentations to you both. And then also from Dave Farnsworth at RAP. He also said outstanding presentations, very impressive. Question for you, Evelyn. Did the EPA and Berkeley RFF studies identified what you were describing as the missing values, i.e. biodiversity, et cetera?
Yeah, so they included those such as biodiversity and loss of ecosystem services as limitations of the models that currently exist. And a lot of the kind of experts in the space, when they do have, integrated assessment models are what's being used at the federal policy level in the US right now. And what I've heard is kind of the most common criticism is that they are lacking some of those key pieces, which would just increase the estimate. So yes, EPA and Resources for the Future both identified key damage sectors that are not yet included in their modeling.
So identified them as gaps and not included in the models, right? Thanks, Evelyn. So there's 2, I think these questions can be combined and you can answer one or both of them, Josh. They are both to you. First from Brian Woods at the Agency of Natural Resources, well done. And Brian says, we all know that heat pumps work best in a well-insulated home, but combining weatherization and heat pump installation makes for an expensive project out of the reach of many Vermonters. Does your work provide any insight as to whether weatherization and heat pump installations need to be performed simultaneously, or if heat pump installation alone can result in emissions reductions, or if weatherization should be prioritized? And perhaps a related question from Paul Zabriskie at Capstone is, Josh, if you could wave a wand, what would be the first thing that you would do to advance the adoption of clean heat technologies?
2 more great questions. I'll answer them separately. So Brian, yes, I should have mentioned that, but what I learned through my research was that the conservation of energy, if you have an unweatherized house, the conservation of energy will actually prove more effective than implementing a heat pump. And the second part of that is that is primarily true with air source heat pumps, given like the drafts and airflow of an unweatherized house. I'm unsure which one would be better to prioritize in the case of like an air to water heat pump that, provides radiant heating, or even like a ground source heat pump, which would also itself just be very expensive. So if you're looking at weatherization, you would probably want to look at that first. But yeah, I would say weatherization definitely seems to be the thing to prioritize, through like just to make sure you're conserving energy and not constantly losing any sort of heat that's generated or transferred into the home. And then Paul, if I could wave a wand, um, I would say like maybe, I mean, ideally, like wave a wand and every house is weatherized, so that doesn't even like become a factor. But secondly, I would say like being able to kind of like set the media straight and sort of like kind of correct the messaging around that they don't work in cold climates, as well as just like making sure everyone's on the same page with realistic output and like their capability, because they are, I mean, as I was saying, my family is a testament to how well they work, and they work brilliantly, and our home is always very comfy. So that would be, I think, what I would do.
Thanks, Josh. Next question is for you, Evelyn, and this is from Haley Rowe. Also says, great presentations. Thank you to both of you. Evelyn, for do the updated RFF social cost of carbon guidance or the updated EPA social cost of carbon guidance that's still under review, do either of those give specific guidance or recommendations on a preferred discount rate? Or do the updates that they've done remain agnostic about which discount rate to use?
Yes, so the Resources for the Future Berkeley estimate of $185 per metric ton is their preferred 2% discount rate. And then for the EPA value, the like kind of publicized like main value that you look at, the $190 was calculated with a 2% discount rate as well. But I'll emphasize that the EPA number is still in its peer review stage, so it's not the final recommendation from the EPA.
Thanks. There was a question in the chat from Representative Scott Campbell, if these presentations were being recorded and would be available. And just to assure everyone, yes, this is being recorded and it will be available on the EAN website, along with Josh and Evelyn's full reports, and I believe their PowerPoint presentations as well, likely next week. So if anybody missed it and wanted to share the link, that would be great. Next, we have a question from Richard Cowart at RAP. And this is a question for you, Josh. Rich says, Efficiency Maine tells us that the average heat pump installed in their program replaces only 25% to 33% of a home's fossil heating load. Does this experience and your family's experience suggest that we shouldn't be delivering mini splits per se, but educating consumers on the need for heat pump systems, a system as a whole working together rather than one single unit? Also, how many homes in Vermont have hydronic heat systems, and how effective are heat pumps currently available here in converting those homes to cleaner heat?
I would say it's also a great question, Rich. I'll answer the first one. So I would say that our experience does suggest this, but I would say, I mean, I think getting an entire heat pump system can be a stepping stone for many people. Like, it's not affordable. That was one of the things I was addressing in the single zone versus multi-zone. Multi-zones are much more attractive because they can cover more area within one sort of outdoor unit. So you're just sending pipes off piping, I guess, off one outdoor unit into multiple heads inside. but that has proven many times to not be as effective. And so I think we should definitely be educating consumers on the need for systems and the need for involving many. And I think many have assumed that by opting for the multi-zone, but I think more research and education around the single zone versus the multi-zone, if you're going to go with a ductless, should take place, because we have 3 separate single zones that do their job phenomenally. And I can't speak from personal experience to multi-zone, so it's just from what I've heard and researched. But I think establishing that difference would be effective. And then I am unfamiliar with how many homes have hydronic systems, so I can't answer that one too confidently, but it's a very interesting question.
Thanks, Josh. And Rich also has a question for you, Evelyn, and he's wondering, or he says, there's a huge difference in the social cost of carbon based on the discount rate that is chosen. Can you speak to the arguments for using any discount rate? And do you agree with the arguments for the choice of 2% as the appropriate discount rate?
Yeah, so like I said, the starting point for kind of figuring out the discount rate in economic analysis is researchers look at people's preferences for money on low risk investments in the market. And that's kind of the starting place. And I think the concern about using, my individual preference for money over my lifespan to then kind of project that to a much greater time span, I think there's certainly some ethical concerns there. And I've heard advocated for a lower discount rate closer to 1% or even lower than that, often from members of Josh and I's generation. So I think that some of those arguments are certainly compelling. I think I've reading so much about the work being done at Resources for the Future, their kind of preferred 2% discount rate, in conversation with them, kind of based on the best available literature that they can find. So I think I'm also certainly receptive to their kind of argument and choice there. But it's a fascinating question, and I think it was, and I see why the Climate Council chose to also do analyses with 1% and 3% to make sure that in continued climate discussion, the sensitivity to the discount rate is something at the top of mind.
Thanks, Evelyn. And a follow-up question for you from Brian Woods at the Agency of Natural Resources, or I should say the Climate Action Office within the Agency of Natural Resources. And he says as well, thank you, Evelyn, nice work. How do you think the social cost of carbon or social cost of greenhouse gases can be best used for policy decision-making? If we are in an all of the above mitigation scenario, what does the social cost of carbon analysis actually tell us? Also, if an entity has X dollars to invest and can choose between a mitigation project and an adaptation or a resilience project, can that social cost of carbon be employed in order to inform a decision?
Yeah, so for the first part of the question, no, sorry, I was reading it, just open right there. Oh, no worries. In an all or nothing, yeah, kind of an all hands on deck mitigation scenario, I think one of the key uses for the social costs of greenhouse gases in the policymaking process is a public messaging component. I think that there are many people kind of in the public and the constituents that don't grasp kind of the magnitude and scope of the impacts from climate change. And I think putting a dollar amount to that is really valuable in just communicating the impacts of climate change and making it clear why mitigation strategies are a worthwhile investment, both in our lifespan and for future generations. To the second part, between a mitigation project and an adaptation project, I think it can provide, again, it's complementary to the marginal abatement approach and other forms of analysis that can be used for a starting point for carbon pricing, for example. But but I think that is kind of precisely the question that it seeks to address, is kind of comparing the costs and benefits of either investing, $1 million public dollars into a mitigation project and comparing it to an adaptation project.
Thanks, Evelyn. So we've got one last question that is for both of you. And then after you answer that question, I'm going to turn it over to Christine for a closing comment. The question for both of you is from Izzy Cheney, who says, very interesting and important research. Congrats to both of you on fantastic presentations. To both of you, what was the most challenging part of this research process? And what was the most rewarding part?
I'm sorry. I'd say the most challenging of the research project, the research process, was probably the kind of self-construction of it in a way. We had the guidance of the EAN team, which was very helpful, but they also wanted it to kind of be a learning experience in that regard, and kind of go through the motions of figuring out how to do something like this on your own. So that was definitely very challenging, but very thankful for the guidance that I got. And the most rewarding part of it was seeing it all come together. Like there was, moments in week 5, 6, 7 where, I have like 10, 15, 20 pages of notes, just like, constantly trying to organize them. And like you look at them and you're like, how am I going to put this in a report? Like it's just so much information, and it's so it was really rewarding sort of watching it sort of come together. And then I'd say the other rewarding element too is just like contributing to something that I'm so passionate about in a state that I've been a part of for a good few years now. So yeah, it feels good to contribute to a good cause, and a cause I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the most challenging and exciting aspects of it is that this work on economic analysis for climate change is ever changing, and it's improving very, very rapidly. I mean, we see that with just, going from the 2021 climate action plan to now, the fact that there's been such huge steps forward just in that amount of time is kind of emblematic of how dynamic the space is right now. And it's one that I'm hopefully excited to help work on in the future. So under, parsing through kind of all of the different publications and then their, technical support documents and all the different estimates and by year estimates. So parsing through all of that and then trying to construct a representative and fair comparison was something I enjoyed working through. Yeah, and then most rewarding was kind of feeling like I've kind of established a pretty strong kind of conceptual understanding of the topic. I had my share of aha moments where I was kind of trying to piece together all these different values that I was reading about. And then, yeah, kind of to Josh's point as well, connecting it back to Vermont into climate policy work here is really exciting.
Before we end and before I turn it over to Christine, I just want to also note, thank you to Cara for organizing the webinar, advancing the slides through this screen. No one has seen Cara's face on the screen, but she was an integral part of making this presentation go off smoothly. So thank you to Cara. And again, just so proud of and thankful for both of you, Josh and Evelyn, and your wonderful work this summer. We're really lucky to be able to work with you and very proud of you. And I'm going to turn it over to Christine now.
Thank you, EAN, for sponsoring yet again another truly inspiring summer. I think you can see now why it's just a delight to work with 2 interns each summer. It gives me so much hope for the future. I strongly encourage other nonprofits, organizations, and businesses to consider launching your own, even small internship program like we have with 1 or 2 interns. And I'd be happy to help you think through what might work for your situation in the future if that would be of use to you. So thank you for participating, and thank you for some very thoughtful questions, and congratulations to Evelyn and Josh for doing a marvelous job, not just today, but all summer long.
Thanks, everyone.